I am excited. I'm pumped, TC. Let's get going.
It's time to rock and roll right here as we go to ringside right now with this edition of NWC Slammin'.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Indy Handshake Wrestling Podcast. I'm Paul Ponte, and my guest today is TC Martin, former promoter of the NWC, the National Wrestling Conference. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Paul. Great to be with you.
So, I'm new to learning about the NWC. I've been, paying attention to wrestling my whole life, but for some reason, this one just happened to slip by me until recently when I interviewed Johnny Psycho Paine.
You must be a youngster, man. You must be a millennial.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a millennial.
NWC, man. What's up with that, Paul? Come on. What's your history, man?
It makes sense because I started watching right around 95, 96. So it's like, and then of course from there you only get into independent stuff until later, you know what I mean? But hey, it's fine. So NWC, there was a lot going on. You had guys like Sabu and RVD especially when he's super young. It hasn't even exploded. He was a tag team wrestler at the time. ECW TV was around, but it wasn't huge. It was a small little regional thing. So you had guys like, Cactus Jack and everything who had been on WCW, but WCW wasn't exactly the right platform for Cactus Jack's, let's say, style. So, how did you get into promoting the NWC, and what's your history in wrestling?
So let's take it back to when I was a kid. I grew up in Sacramento, California. I don't know if you're a Bay Area guy, you may be familiar with some of the old-time promotions. Roy Shire was the promoter. Roy did stuff in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and Sacramento was one of his territories. It was called Big Wrestling back in the days. And my father used to take me to the Channel 40 TV studios where they would film the weekly television episodes. So I got indoctrinated into wrestling at a very young age. And of course, in those days, it was Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens, Kenji Shibuya, Peter Mavia, Rocky Johnson, the list goes on and on. So I became a wrestling fan at a very young age. As I got older, started to get into, the entertainment business, sports business, I went to school for broadcast journalism, television, radio, all that kind of stuff. But I always had this thing for wrestling. I remember purposely getting a satellite dish, I think when I was like 19 or 20 years old, just so I could watch the WWF back in the day, in the early 80s, the Madison Square Garden shows. So the first Monday of the month, they would have these just classic shows. And of course, we were watching the WWF back in those days with the superstars of wrestling on Saturday afternoon, et cetera, et cetera. So always enough to meet some of the promoters on the West Coast in Sacramento, and I was able to get involved with the WWF as their ring announcer for the West Coast. So I was doing the ring announcing for the Sacramento shows at the classic Sacramento Memorial Auditorium, also down in the Bay Area and other parts throughout Northern California. So at that point in time, I got a chance to meet a lot of those wrestlers, and this was the mid 80s to late 80s or so. When I moved to Las Vegas, to do my national sports talk radio show. And at that point in time, we would talk about everything. And there was a local casino owner there that owned the Silver Nugget, and he was a boxing promoter. So he knew my interest in boxing. I was doing ring announcing for Top Rank Boxing and other stuff of that nature. And then my wrestling background kind of got brought up through a mutual friend. And he said, I would love to promote wrestling here at the Silver Nugget. So we were doing monthly boxing shows there. And he goes, how can we do this wrestling? And I said, fortunately, I've got, some contacts in the business. So let's see going about doing this thing. So it started out as just, initial conversation. And then there was some local talent there in Las Vegas. They were put in touch with me. And next thing we know, that we were going to start a wrestling organization based out of Las Vegas. Basically, it was going to be backed by the owner of the Silver Nugget. He was going to, put up the money. I was going to, run the promotion and basically utilize my contacts that I had built over a number of years and build this wrestling promotion. Like you mentioned, ECW was an East Coast based thing, so a lot of people on the West Coast really weren't familiar with it. The only thing they were familiar with was the WWF at the time and WCW. So I've always had this, entrepreneurial spirit, promoting, events, being very involved in boxing, doing entertainment events, concerts, radio, all that sort of thing. So I said, if we're going to do this thing, we're going to do it right. And, reached out to some of the guys who I met during my course at the WWF and said, hey, we're going to, build this promotion from ground zero. So I thought it was very, very important to not only latch on to the national guys who were basically free agents, so to speak, at the time, just guys that just left the WWF or were still with the WWF, maybe on a per event contract basis. But I thought it was also important to build our own local talent as well. So that's how the NWC basically began. We had our venue, the Silver Nugget Casino. We had a owner that was very, interested in capitalizing on, bringing crowds into this pavilion that they had. And that's how it started. And then it gained steam. And I decided that we're going to actually build a roster. So we're not going to treat it like a lot of independents where we're going to reach out to guys periodically. All of our guys were under contract. And so we approached it that way. And we were forced to do that through the Nevada State Athletic Commission, because at that point in time, boxing and wrestling, everything had to go under the Athletic Commission. So you had to have all these guys under contract either by show or through your organization, and because it was legitimized. It wasn't known as entertainment at that point in time. It was known as an athletic event. So all of the wrestlers had to go through the proper testing. They had to get licenses. If you were a ring announcer, you had to have a license. If you were a doctor, a timekeeper, all of that stuff. So again, that's how it started, and that's where it built. And then slowly but surely, after doing a few shows, I said, to tell the story properly, we're going to have to involve TV. Basically, using the model that Vince McMahon had done when he started on the East Coast and slowly but surely branched out, to the West Coast and throughout the United States and eventually through the world. So, I decided that we need to do a weekly television show. So I orchestrated that, where basically we would do once a month cards, and we would do between 12 and 14 matches on that show. And all of these matches were videotaped. So we could get at least 3 or 4 episodes for a 1-hour Saturday afternoon show. We aired on the local Warner Brothers affiliate Saturday afternoon at 12 noon. And again, I'm a firm believer that you have to have the television to tell the narrative and to build the story for the live event. And it just gained steam. And next thing you know, we have a great array of talent that I was able to put together. And we were rolling in Las Vegas.
That's such a nice confluence of events happening. So, you just happen to be at this place where, because a lot of the problem is finding money for starting wrestling. So you happen to be a place where you have a guy who has funding and he's like, let's do wrestling. And you're like, I know wrestling. Boom, there you go. Then you have a lot of guys who, like you said, were not under contract. The reason they're not under contract, for anyone who's listening and not understanding the business at the time, WCW was not a threat to the WWF. So WWF didn't do that thing they did later where they just kept people under contract even though they weren't using them for years at a time. So all these guys were available to use. And so you end up getting these big names, like you said, with a mix of local guys. And to do that is pretty amazing, especially for the time period. Now, when this is happening and you start seeing all these guys, I found it interesting, by the way, that you did announcing for the WWF as well. I guess at the time, like nowadays, they have their own guys who do announcing that travel with them.
Correct.
Yeah, but at the time they were like,
it was all regional at that point in time.
Yeah.
So, like for example, the late great Howard Finkel, who just passed a couple weeks ago, he was the guy in New York. He worked for Vince, so he would do all of the East Coast stuff. But every time they branched out to the West Coast, Southern California, they had their ring announcer, Billy Anderson, who ended up working with was there down there. There was a different guy in Chicago. So for Northern California, we had a guy that had done the old big time wrestling, like I mentioned, back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And he got ill and he passed away. So I was able to step in with him. Red Bastine was the agent at that point in time. So basically, I got introduced to Red Bastine and told Red I would love to do this. He was able to give me a shot. That led me to introducing myself to Bob Cartago, who worked with Vince and, at the national office at the WWF for many, many years. So that's how I got into it initially. Like you said, it was all regional at the time.
Wow. So now you're running shows, you got stuff going on. Before you had been mixing yourself into the business, but now you're full on kind of running a business in wrestling. What's the first thing you start noticing? Oh, this part of it is not how I thought it would be.
I think that, when it came, pretty much I had a good beat on it. But again, I did thrust myself into it, and I'm not going to say it was a total one-man operation because I did have some key people around me, but I was, running basically all aspects of it from, getting the wrestlers, doing the marketing, doing the promotion, doing the broadcasting element, arranging the matches, overseeing the ticketing, all of that stuff. Slowly but surely, we started adding some pieces as we started to grow. And then I brought a guy on to handle like the merchandising, and I saw, okay, where this was going, and, putting together, wrestlers merchandise, our own NWC merchandise, videos, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the thing for me was probably when it came time down to really do the very first show, to get the wrestlers involved and say, okay, what are we going to do? So I had the matchups, and I knew, where I wanted to go, and they would just sit down with me and say, okay, who's going over tonight? What's the verdict, and this and that. And I probably didn't realize at that point in time, how much that they were like relying on me to determine the outcome of the match. And I think what really got me over with the guys was that I gave them a lot of freedom. So when we would sit down and determine, the matches, because I wasn't privy to that stuff when I was announcing with the WWF. Okay, I didn't go into those meeting rooms earlier in the day. I didn't go into the locker room when they're planning out the matches. So that was probably the element that I said, okay, this is where I've got to take control over and do. And I found it that it just clicked immediately, just like that, where the guys would come back to me and I would say, okay, here's what I want. So we got, whatever. We got Cactus and Sabu. I'm looking for, we need 20 minutes. Okay. We're going, and I would get kind of detailed. I'd say, okay, Cactus, you're going to enter the ring first. I was big on entrance music and what we were going to do with that. That was before the time of pyrotechnics and all that. Sabu, you're going to come in later. Okay. Cactus, you're going to attack him. Boom, boom, boom. Then we're going to do this, and this is going to go out to the crowd, and this and that. The time. And they came back to me and said, that's awesome. And they loved it that they actually had freedom to do what they wanted to for a bulk of the match, where I wasn't scripting everything. I just basically told them how I wanted to start, how I wanted it to end. And as long as you guys get there, I trust you and you trust me. And that word got out through all the guys that like, hey man, this is a great organization to work for.
Yeah, because they're professionals, they're adults. If they know their craft, like if they didn't know their craft, you wouldn't hire them. You know what I mean? That's
correct.
And especially some of them, who had worked in the WWF at the time, like guys like Road Warriors or whoever, they're used to, from all accounts, a very micromanaging style when
correct.
they're working
that way. And that's I think what the guys liked was like, wow, he's going to give us, some freedom here where we never had that in the WWF.
Yeah. So how were the crowds in Vegas at first? Did it seem to get more of a wrestling crowd as it went on, or did it start out pretty heavy immediately? Because Vegas, you always hear like positives and negatives as far as Vegas as a wrestling town. So how did you find it when you were doing it?
I found that it was never really sparse in the beginning. So our arena held about 1,800 people. And I'd have to go back and look, but I would say probably for the first show, we probably had, a half full building at that point in time. And through the casino industry, you always have that ability to comp people. You comp your VIP players. Now, this is Silver Nugget. It's not Caesars. It's not the MGM. So it's a local neighborhood casino in North Las Vegas. And again, not at the best end of Las Vegas as well. So, their VIP players were lower level, for a local, so to speak. So you could always, have that where the casino owner wanted to say, hey, we want to, spiff some of our VIP clients. We want to get them tickets and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we were selling tickets. I remember back in those days, again, we're dealing with the mid 90s to the late 90s, and ticket prices were $18 and $12. 18 for ringside and 12 for GA. And the way we had it was the reserve seats, I think, were like the first like 8 rows, and then after that it was GA after that. So then, with the product and with the names that we're bringing in, it caught fire pretty well. Then once we launched the TV show, probably about 6 months into it, then again, you're able to tell your story. People can follow along. So I would say that we started getting sellouts probably, 3, 4, 5 shows into it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So so that's like a rocket, basically, your promotion at the time,
Yeah. And I say that it was the reason for the success is Las Vegas would clamor to the WWF shows. Okay. But the WWF wasn't coming there regularly. They may come there maybe once or twice. Much wrestling us, and there were wrestlers who actually lived in the city. Bear, Godfather, he lived there. One of the first guys that I met was Keith Height, and he was an up and coming wrestler, and he worked with Bear at the Crazy Horse, and they were bouncers there. And Keith, wanted to get involved in wrestling, so he approached me. We had a mutual friend in the casino business. And he said, hey, brother, I know Bear, I know the Godfather, I know a couple of the other boys. We can bring these guys into this and that. And then meanwhile, we were going to bring Keith up. So I said, that's great. So at that point in time, I thought it was very important for us to have local talent as well, too. And so Keith was pretty well trained. Bear actually trained Keith. And Keith says, I got this gimmick that I want to try out on you. What do you think? And he goes, it's the Thug. And so he was a white guy, but he was kind of a hard ass, and he had the gift of gab. He worked. He was a little bit stiff. He admitted that in the very, very beginning. But this is a character that we felt that we could build. So we sat down. Okay, where are we going to build this guy from? Okay, you're the Thug. We're going to make you from Detroit. Okay, you're going to be a hard ass white boy from Detroit, Michigan, and you're going to insult people. You're going to be a heel. And it worked. It worked. So we had guys like that locally. Then I teamed up. The first thing I had to do was, find a ring. Okay, we didn't have a ring. We had a boxing ring at the Silver Nugget, but we didn't have a wrestling ring. So I was turned on to Jesse Hernandez, who was down in Riverside, and Jesse had trained Sting along with the Ultimate Warrior, along with Bill Anderson. So I got in touch with Jesse. And Jesse was providing the ring and doing all this stuff for the WWF shows. Then he had his own independent promotion down in San Bernardino. And I said, Jesse, I'm going to be running this promotion. I'd love to use you. And Jesse goes, well, I'm also a referee. I go, beautiful. You can provide the ring. You can be the referee. And he goes, and I have a wrestling school. I go, better yet. How about if we work together and we develop talent? So through Jesse's wrestling school, he would have all of these guys. And then I would go down and visit him every few weeks. And when he felt that guys were ready, then he would say, hey, come on down, T. I want you to look at these guys. And if they're ready for you, then we'll develop a gimmick for them, a character for them, and then we'll bring them in. So a lot of our young guys who our jobbers were at the time were guys from Jesse's school. The guys that we felt had a lot of potential, then we actually built them into something. Tom Howard was a guy who had a great potential, and he had a gimmick as KGB, and it was like kind of a Russian guy coming off, with Rocky V with Dolph Lundgren. He had that look, and I said, this is good, but I'm not sure that we want to go this direction with a Russian type of thing. We had the Iron Sheik and this and that. I thought that was kind of played out. I go, well, there's another character that we can develop. He goes, he designed his own outfits and everything, come in with a surfboard, and he was kind of a young high flyer type of guy that developed under Jesse. I said, that's what we're going to use. So he was one of those young guys that we built. He got a lot of play in Mexico. So he was working in Mexico, under a mask and this and that, under a different character, but he had a lot of good training. So we would take guys like that we felt, could be marketable, that were good workers. And again, at this point in time, we were really wanting to try to promote the high flyers and that sort of thing. So that's what led me to bringing in Sabu and Rob Van Dam and other people like that. So next thing you know, like I said, not only we develop our own talent, but we're getting these indie guys, and we did have a little bit of a budget, so we could fly guys in. We never overpaid guys, but what we found out was the guys had such a good time and I come from that entertainment background. If you treat people right, they're going to treat you right. And what they loved about, coming to Vegas and working for me was, number one, it was Las Vegas. They were going to get fed. They're going to get put in a hotel. They're going to get paid well, which, as you know, a lot of guys in those days were not paying guys well. They were getting stiffed, and they were under contract. And that's what they liked about it. There was this security that they were going to get their plane tickets, flown.
And the hotel was comping the rooms as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So,
See?
you were getting everything. Again, I was treating it like the entertainment business if you're promoting a concert. And this is what we had to do in the boxing industry as well, too. And I think that's what the guys liked about it. So once word got on, like, hey, there's this promotion in Las Vegas. This guy treats us well. He gives us creativity. Everything is so well organized. It's not, fly by the seat of your pants. And there was that, notion, which, to this day, people look back on it, said that we were ahead of our time. And, the NWC was ahead of its time. And all it was is I didn't like a lot of the new direction where the WWF, WCW was going. I wanted to bring back kind of the old school thing, and it was still relevant enough, like going back to those days that I mentioned in Madison Square Garden with the ring entrances where the crowd was heavily involved, not all the pyrotechnics and this and that, and just, get involved, get the guys involved, let them work, let them engage with the fans, let's build this territory together. And again, when you had an NWC card, you knew who the roster was. Slowly but surely, we would add guys as they became available. So again, our roster, was Sabu. It was Cactus Jack. It was Terry Funk. It was the Honky Tonk Man. It was the Ultimate Warrior. Again, we had our local guys with Bill Anderson. We had Bobby Bradley. And that's where we went with this. We brought in the Bushwhackers, and then we would test that to see how it worked out. And again, Tito Santana was one of our first guys. Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Nails, and you bring back the guys that you feel not only can draw crowds, but are they trustworthy? Are they going to follow the program? Are they going to be committed to you? And again, like any business, you weed out the ones you feel are not right for you, and you keep the guys that are right. And this truly became a family. The NWC was a family. And if you talk to any of those guys, talk to Johnny Blake, Johnny Psycho Paine, he was one of those guys.
Oh, yeah, he had a lot of fond things to say about the company, and I thought this is like an interesting, kind of not so widely reported on, like a wonderful piece of the 90s in wrestling. So that's what got me really interested in it. I might have to hit you up to see if you have any of that footage or something, because you can only find so much online.
Yes, I've got all the masters, and honestly, that has kind of haunted me over the years. Because we released a best of Total Chaos, best of the NWC Volume 1 that was on VHS. It was 99 minutes, and we would sell out of that all the time. But then, after we disbanded everything, I kind of let everything go, but I kept everything. But now with this kind of, and I get hit by this all the time from friends, from colleagues, from people who just, you got to do this. You got, it's, the independent scene is coming back. And, my old business partner, he says, we got to do a reunion. I go, well, but all the guys are either passed on or they can't work anymore. How are we going to do a reunion? Well, we can do, a roundtable discussion, or we can do something like that. So I admit I have lacked with that. People have been hitting me up for years. As we hit this summer, this would be the 25-year anniversary of the NWC. And before COVID-19 came down, I was contemplating of doing a reunion and getting guys back together. Because not only did we promote here in Las Vegas, but we promoted in my hometown of Sacramento as well. So we had two strong territories. And in Sacramento, we were promoting at the Memorial Auditorium, and my business partner, my concert business, Jim Gonzalez, he was tied in with 24-Hour Fitness. So again, we kind of had that built-in sponsorship. So when, the Silver Nugget kind of went away after time, we were able to continue the Sacramento promotion, and I moved back there in the late 90s as well, too. So we had two strong territories. So people in Sacramento and people in Las Vegas and people in the West Coast, they were very familiar with the NWC during that time. So, for some people, maybe, we were, Dave Meltzer would come to our shows. He would write about us in the Wrestling Observer. We were gaining steam, but if you were, a younger guy, or if you lived in, maybe down south or something like that, and maybe you weren't familiar with us, you'd only hear about us, through, the magazines, the Wrestling Observer. the newsletters, that sort of thing. But people on the West Coast were here during that time. They were very aware of the NWC.
Yeah. So let's go into a little bit of, you had all these big names, big personalities, guys that, some of them, the guys like the Warrior, the Sheik. We've all heard the internet stories and innuendo and all that about all them. Were there any moments, and you don't have to name any names here or anything like that. This is not a shoot podcast. That's not what I'm about. But do you ever find yourself with some of these bigger names frustrated if they weren't? Let's say maybe, as I like to say on this, sometimes people think they're bigger than the show. So did you ever find that with any of the guys?
There were a couple guys that I mentioned where I would use one time, and if you got invited back, that means, you were good to work with, and you were going to be part of this family. Because, again, I treated this really like, I come from the team sports world too. I coached, basketball and baseball and that sort of thing. So I really treated this, around ourselves with maybe 15 to 20 of the best guys that want to grow with this and be part of the team. And there are a couple guys that felt that maybe they were bigger, and again, they didn't have any use for me or the company if they were going to be like that. So there were a couple guys that were like that. The Warrior situation, I'll talk openly about that. I mean, that was a major coup for me to get him, but ultimately it ended the company and ended the Las Vegas run for what happened with him. And again, there's a lot of stories out there, and again, I have no problem, speaking about it.
Yeah, let's get into that. I mean, the fact that you even had the Warrior for a little bit. The fact that you even had the Warrior for a little bit is already. I mean, WCW couldn't do it.
Right.
They had a fake Warrior.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're gaining steam, and you're seeing the roster that we're building, the Warrior became available. WWF, and he wasn't working with Vince anymore. I went to Bill Anderson, who actually trained Warrior. Said, we could probably get Warrior, here. I said, well, let me reach out to him, and I'll talk to him to see if he's interested. So we had a couple phone conversations. He was very intrigued about what was happening. He was living outside of Phoenix, Arizona, Scottsdale at the time, so it was very close to him. He was hearing the buzz, and he knew what was happening, this and that. And in the beginning, it was like, okay, brother, I'll come work for you, but this is going to be my price tag. And I said, no problem. So let me weigh this to see if it makes sense for us. And so, again, we had X amount of dollars that we could budget for every show. So knowing that he was going to cost more money than anybody else, I said, okay, so maybe we'll scale down, a show, because we know if we bring the Warrior onto this show, that we're going to reap the rewards, we're going to get the benefit here, and we'll sell out. So I wanted to bring him in and build something with him. So we already had Honky Tonk. So I talked to Honky, and I talked to some of the other guys. I said, what do you think of this guy? So they told me some of the stories and this and that. They go, but you know what? If you think that you can work with this guy, work with him, we'll work with him. No problem whatsoever. So we came to an agreement, and we brought him down for a show. I told him what was going to be entailed in this, that you're going to come early, you're going to do interviews, we're going to make you part of this company, we'll announce a signing, we want you to do the television interviews and everything. He did everything that I asked him to do. So we teased it the month before. So again, we decided if we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. So I remember announcing that, what we did, and I took this page from Vince and Howard Finkel. So before our main event of that month's show, I would always make sure I had at least 4 or 5 matches ready to go for next month, so we can announce that night, the next date, and then drive people to go buy tickets immediately. And that's exactly, we would sell probably 200 or 300 tickets. After that match was over, they would just run to the box office and do that. And so I said, okay, we're going to make this big announcement. So we did an angle with Honky Tonk where he's coming on out, this and that. And Honky says, I've wrestled everybody you put in front of me. I need some competition, this and that, blah, 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 blah. So we did this big old thing. And I said, okay, Honky, you're going to get your chance. And I said, the main event coming on, July 22nd, whatever, blah, blah. It's the Honky Tonk Man and the newest member of the NWC, the Ultimate Warrior. And people just popped. They couldn't believe it. It was crazy. So we did that. And then the weeks leading up to that, we shot our video for TV interviews and everything. And he was a pleasure to work with. We did that show. He came in. He was fine. He saw how we ran everything. After that first show was over, he said, I want to be involved with this. He goes, I don't want to be involved as just a guy that you're paying. He goes, I want to be your partner in this business. And so I took that to heart. We had conversations, and I made him a partner in the business. So this detailed me going down to Scottsdale. And basically what he wanted out of the deal was he was starting his own wrestling school, Warrior University. So he wanted to be able to promote that in the Las Vegas market. So it didn't really interfere with what Jesse was doing, because Jesse was doing his thing in San Bernardino. And so, again, we would run commercials during our television show to promote Warrior University. And it was like kind of a win-win. It got to the point, a lot of people were shocked at this, where now I wasn't even paying Warrior to be on the cards, because he was able to get a percentage of the gate, and he was fine with that. So again, we were working very closely to get that. And again, he was with us, and everything, was fine. There was a point in time that, his business was struggling, back in Arizona. And, at our last show that we ended up doing, we outgrew the Silver Nugget because we were drawing bigger crowds. But the main reason we left the Silver Nugget was the owner who I mentioned, he was now out of the business. And the original owner of the Silver Nugget came back, and he really wasn't interested in doing wrestling anymore. The boxing guy who was running the Silver Nugget was actually part owner. Boxing was done now, so now it was only wrestling. And the original of the Silver Nugget says, I really kind of want to get away from this. We were bringing in money, but I don't think he was real happy with the crowds that were drawn, and he didn't want to be an event-based, type of thing. He wanted to get back into the gaming aspect, bowling, and other things that they were doing there. So we said, okay, we're going to move this back. Actually started. Our first show was at the Aladdin, and it was an anniversary show that we were doing, and we had close to 4,000 people, which we couldn't fit in the Silver Nugget, but we had that at the Aladdin. And the Aladdin also was not only doing concerts, but they had done boxing shows as well. So we would have the ring on the stage like they would for boxing. So people were kind of used to that. But after the one show, getting back to what you alluded to, one guy feeling that he's bigger than the promotion, Warrior basically talked his way into getting to the box office and stole the gate receipts from the box office that night at the Aladdin. So the boys weren't getting paid that night.
Oh, wow.
So they knew exactly what happened. So I had to go back after the show and told them what happened. Again, being the family that we all were, they said, don't worry about it, T. That's the way this guy is. We kind of knew that. Unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way with that. And, basically that was the reason that we quit promoting in Las Vegas.
Wow.
So,
and these crowds, for context, everyone talks about the ECW arena. I've been to the ECW arena. I went and I watched a wrestling show there a couple of years ago for Luke Hawx, one of the guests on this podcast. His company ran a show there. The ECW arena fits 1,300 people. And they managed to, gain this, nationwide buzz from a thing that held 1,300 people. You're talking about 4,000 people.
Right.
Like, these are the kind of numbers you're doing. And then for this to happen, you just got to feel like this is a kick in the balls.
Big time, big time. So at that point in time, okay, we have all this momentum. How can we continue this now? Because basically we lost our original investor. We lost our home. Again, doing shows at the Aladdin for special shows, anniversary shows, we want to get back to the Silver Nugget and do our shows there. We can't do that. And Las Vegas really didn't have a venue that had that same size and had that atmosphere. And I think if you talk to all the guys that work for me, they'll tell you that Silver Nugget was just an amazing place because it wasn't pristine, but it just had like kind of an old world feel of like, and putting 1,500 to 1,800 people in that place. It was raucous. We had a great sound system in there. The crowd was authentic. And again, just moving to a bigger venue, it just didn't make sense. And when you move to a bigger venue, you have to deal with union costs. Okay, you're dealing with union labor, stagehands, all that sort of thing. And okay, for a one-off, we can get away with that. But the bottom line is, the Aladdin wants crowds of 4,000 or 5,000, 7,000 in there. If we drew 1,000 or 1,200, they're not going to want that. So again, you had a 19,000 seat Thomas and Mack Center. The MGM just came in with 15,000 fans. As we know, Herb Abrams tried that. That didn't work, drawing 300 people there. So it's like we didn't have that perfect venue anymore. And that was probably, those were the reasons why we basically had to shut down Las Vegas. And we moved the promotion pretty much to Sacramento because we had a 3,500 seat venue in Sacramento, but we weren't completely filling that, but we were still getting 2,000 or 2,200 there. And that still had a raucous feeling because that was the old historic Memorial Auditorium, and Sacramento embraced that because they remember those big time wrestling days. They remember the WWF, going to that same building. We weren't big enough where we could go to Arco Arena that seated 17,000. So we had our niche, but then again, that was kind of an expensive place so without sponsorship and without regular television revenue, it was hard to sustain it back in those days. And so, at that point in time, it was just impossible to run it anymore. And I felt bad for the guys because they were part of this, but they understood. And like they said, they go, this was, the highest level of an independent that they'd ever worked for before. And again, we were called an independent, but the way we ran the company and the organization with TV and the crowds that we were having, the roster talent we had, I always kind of thought that maybe independent was a little bit of a slap in the face, but I understand why you say that because there's WWF at the time, WCW, and then there's everybody else. Even ECW wasn't independent. We were regional. We did our thing. We were very ahead of our time at that point in time. And again, for me, I just wasn't a wrestling promoter. I was doing national and local sports talk radio. I was promoting concerts. I was in the boxing industry. So, I could step away from wrestling, even though I miss it to this day. But I could still, make a living doing other things because I had like basically a 3 or 4 pronged career.
Yeah. Did you ever come across Warrior again after that situation happened?
We had some conversations, lawsuits filed to try to get that money back because he got and you can do the math. If our average ticket price is around $15 to $18, and we probably maybe had maybe 500 comps, so you say that there's probably 3,000 paid. Do the math. You can imagine how much money that he went away with. And in his mind, it was like, we did have conversation after we had a conversation, a day or two after that. And basically, hey brother, I've been funding this. I'm the star. I'm worth that. And I go, yeah, but what about everybody else? What about what you walked into? That's not my concern. I had the right to do that. And in his mind, and I would spend time with him, whether it was here in Vegas or going down to his home in Scottsdale. And I remember, watching him pop 20 pills a day. And at that point in time, I would just, see the rage that he would have. I would see the change of emotions. So, we knew that
dude was not well.
Yeah, he's not well. He's not. And it's too bad because we had a really great bond. We did have a great friendship. We did. And, we had a business relationship. And, maybe I could have said no to him about, coming in as a partner. But then again, it's the Ultimate Warrior. And if he could bring money, which he was, he was funding a good portion, that especially after we left the Silver Nugget. And it made a lot of sense. But there was always the voice in the back of my mind and hear from other people, watch him, brother, be careful of him. And so then when that news broke, people, it didn't make me look like the bad guy. It made me, basically look like, the victim, which I wasn't, I don't want to be portrayed as the victim, but the truth was that's exactly what happened. And, a lot of the guys, they feel bad because they knew what he did. They knew the type of guy he was from working with him before. I always try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. So I'll say we had good times and we had some bad times. We had more good times with the Warrior, I did personally, than the bad times. But, ultimately, if that didn't happen, who knows how much longer that could have continued, in Vegas. Maybe it doesn't continue because, we lost our business partner at the venue, which was the perfect venue. But, we still had fans and we had a throng of fans. They were still wanting the product. But at that point in time, it just, we couldn't continue.
That must have seemed so frustrating for the new owner to be like, yeah, we don't want this. It's like, but it's making money. Like, why? Like, I get you don't like it, but that's kind of the frustration that WCW had with Turner. Once Turner wasn't running things anymore, they were kind of like, we don't like wrestling. So, and they're like, you realize we're the only thing making you guys money besides sports. Like,
right.
But for, I guess some people, it's always going to be the stigma with wrestling. If the person who's funding things is not into wrestling, it's this black mark, this spot. They're like, we can't be seen as this thing, you know.
Exactly. And I think that owner, again, as I found out later, he was basically kind of leasing the property and the operations to this other guy who they had problems with. And he had problems. And so I think, well, if he was involved in that, then I want to take that away. We don't want to be involved with it. And we did do 1 or 2 shows with that owner. And for him, he just didn't care for it. He didn't care for it. The money was there. We still were drawing the same crowds, but he just wanted to step away. At that point in time, he wanted to go through a remodel, and he wanted to kind of clean up the place. And he just, like I said, didn't want to be known as a sports venue or wrestling or boxing and bringing in that element. He wanted to take that space and keep the space and basically, lease it out for private parties or, weddings, receptions, because that was guaranteed money for him. And he didn't have to worry about, people smashing tables and going up into the casino and have, Cactus slamming Sabu on the blackjack table, and all of those things that happened. And they looked at it like, oh, there's too much risk versus reward here. And again, he didn't like that. And I can't blame him for that. But again, he didn't realize that, hey, I'm in control of this. And, there are so many great stories. We just go on for hours and hours about that. Even the previous owner, didn't know about the business, but he trusted me. I mean, 2 classic ones I'll tell you if you want to hear. So
absolutely,
we said we're going to do a 20-man battle royal. And so we announced that, $1,000, over the top battle royal winner, $10,000. So we announced that. Tickets go on sale immediately after the show's over. The owner says, "Come into my office. I need to talk to you right away." And I go, "What?" He goes, "TC, have you lost your mind? What are you doing?" He goes, "We can't give $10,000 away to the winner of the battle royal. You just promoted $10,000 that we're giving away." He goes, "Are you out of your mind?" This guy's like losing it. And I'm just like sitting there just like smiling. He goes, "What are you smiling about?" I go, and his name was Al. I said, "Al, are you done?" He goes, "Yes, but I'm fuming right now." He goes, "My phone's ringing off the hook. What are we going to do here?" I go, "They're not getting $10,000. What do you mean they're not getting $10,000? You advertised it. You said the winner's going to get $10,000. Those wrestlers are going to come after me. They're going to go sue me. We can't give them $10,000. I go, "Al, they're going to get the $500 or the $750, the $1,000 that we're paying for that night." "Well, why?" I go, "Al, they're under contract."
It's a work, brother.
It's a work. It's not that way. It's for the fans. He goes, "We really don't have to pay the winner $10,000. No," he goes, "That's ingenious."
I mean, can you imagine if you like just the logic of saying, okay, you got a group of 20 guys, right? You're like, okay, hey guys, we're going to completely predetermine this. So I'm just going to decide to give one of you $10,000. You want to talk about starting a riot?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and again, when we did the Desert Death match, when I said again, so ECW was doing their stuff. And again, having Cactus and having Sabu it was like, okay, we're going to bring this version of the West Coast, but we're going to have our own little spin on it. And so again, we did the desert death match with weapons, and we had tables, we had chairs, we had light fixtures, we had bottles, we had all of these things. And then when they took it out to the casino, people said, did they just do that on their own? It's like, no, everything was scripted here. We're dealing with the casino. We got to protect the casino, the gaming control board, all of those things. But did they, when they went out, out of the arena, up the stairs in the casino, we had cameras, in position to follow them and everything. I mean, of course, that went viral. It was fantastic. And yes, literally, there was, a body slam or a suplex in the middle of the sports book. There was a head slam where chips were flying on the table. And, the casino owner was a little bit maybe shocked about that. But then again, the risk for reward was, do you see the play that you're getting, out of this? But all of that was scripted. It was, under control. And again, you put that in the hands of pros like Cactus and Sabu, there's no need to worry about it. They knew where the boundaries were. Terry Funk, another guy, when he would, go into the popcorn machine in the concession area, he knew exactly what he was doing. And again, that was part of the freedom that the guys had, but they knew which boundaries and which lines they could cross, and they couldn't. And it was great.
And it brings the illusion to the audience where anything could happen. I'm going to go check out a show, and you could just be out getting some snacks, and who knows what's going on.
Right. Well, a perfect example of that is, so we did the Iron Sheik. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sheik and Iranian clubs.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a legendary wrestler, Olympic wrestler back in the day, and one of his training methods were these Iranian clubs. And each one of these clubs weighed about 35 pounds. And so that's how Sheik trained, and he would whirl these things over the head. So Sheik says, "Hey, I want to bring the clubs." I go, "Great, bring the clubs, and we're going to do a gimmick with this." And so Sheik and I sat down, and what he did, he'd bring the clubs into the ring, and he would say, "Okay, I'm going to do however many that I can do. We're going to bring anyone out of the audience. If they can do half as many as the Sheik can, then we're going to give them $500." So you got all these strong-arm guys. Like, hey, I'm going to come in here, my bodybuilders, weightlifters. So we would pick 5 guys, during the intermission or before Sheik's match to do this. So Sheik comes in, and all right, Sheik, let's count them off. Let's go. We have the $500 cash, in the pocket, ready to go. So Sheik reels off like 40 of these things, like it's nothing, right? Can anybody do 20? So these 5 guys come in, big, heavy-set guys. Of course, I mean, they couldn't do 2 or 3. They could do maybe 1.5 or 2 on a good day. So first guy comes up, and he does like 2. Okay, good job. Sorry, buddy. Next guy can't even pick up the clubs. He's done. Next guy comes in. He does like maybe 3. Okay. So then there's next guy, picks up the clubs, picks it up like this, can't do it, drops on the ground, goes and tackles Sheik in the middle of the ring. He goes after Sheik and tackles him. Sheik doesn't even go down. Gets this guy, Sheik is pounding him over the head. Sheik, with his curled up toe boots, kicks this guy in the mouth. Teeth go flying. This guy is bleeding out of his mouth and bleeding out of his nose. Sheik is yelling at him, "You MF, you jabroni, who you think you are, messing with Iron Sheik?" He's spitting on the guy. Crowd is going ballistic. We carry this guy out of the stretcher. Sheik is going off, there's your intermission, this and that. So like you said, you never knew what was going to happen. That was not a work. That was a guy literally that just wanted to be part of the show. So Sheik says, so the owner of the Silver Nugget comes up to me and goes, "What happened?" He goes, "This guy's going to sue us." He goes, he's going to sue us. The Sheik just kicked his teeth in. This guy's going to the hospital right now. I said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "What we're going to do?" I go, "We're going to sue this guy." How are we? And Sheik and I and the owner are in this meeting, not backstage. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, "This guy's going to sue us." I go, "No." I said, "It says right on the back of the ticket. You enter at your own risk and all this other kind of stuff." I said, "He came into our domain. He came into I said, "No, we're going to get this guy and we're going to sue him." I never forget Sheik saying, "That good idea, Mr. TC. We sue him. We sue him. Very good, very good." And then, so sure enough, fast forward to the next month. So we're coming out, and comes approaches me down the aisle. He goes, taps me on the shoulder. He goes, TC, you remember me? I look at the guy like this. He opens his mouth. He's got his teeth. He has 2 front teeth missing. He goes, I'm the guy that the Sheik kicked the shit out of. I go, yeah, man. I go, what the heck was that all about? He goes, too much beer, and I wanted to get on TV. I go, well, you succeeded in both of those things, my friend. You were drunk and you got on TV. That was it.
So you have footage of this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
That's on the TV show. Yeah.
Oh, man. You know, and it's funny because, like, people like, especially now, they're like, let's laugh at the Iron Sheik and, you know, how silly he can be on television. Yeah, the dude's a legit trained amateur wrestler and certified badass. Like, right. The idea that someone would even try. But, you know, I guess I always hear from wrestlers that happens. You know, people see them and they're like, you know, it's that, like I don't know if it's little man syndrome or what it is, but people are kind of like, oh, I got to test myself, you know.
Right.
When I was working for a local promotion, actually, Big Time Wrestling, their new incarnation, there was a moment during a Brock Lesnar autograph signing where a guy came up and he slammed the table and he was like, you ain't shit, to Brock Lesnar's face. And like security ushered him out and I'm like, how stupid are people? I don't understand. Yeah.
You always have those guys that want to be part of the show. They figure that, okay, this is their indoctrination into the business. And we would do autograph signings. You know, we had another guy, you know, and Sheik was a great guy. He was funny, and he would always, you know, he had a temper, but again, he felt that he was doing great, you know, business for the promotion as well too. If he calls some guy out and he goes, how you like that? How you like that? You know, and he would call, you know, some racial slurs and this and that. We're going, Sheik, you can't do this. You got, you know, we're in North Las Vegas or we're in South Sacramento, and he's doing these things. And but yeah, you know, the best part of everything that we did was we had that camaraderie with the guys. Never had any major issues. Again, you know, a guy like Rob Van Dam, and he'll tell you to this day, you know, Rob, you know, comes on my radio show all the time, and he remembers those days where I took a shot on him, and Sabu introduced him. You know, Sabu was such a great guy because, you know, Sabu was doing his thing with ECW, but, you know, I decided I was going to make Sabu the champ. It took me one match when I brought him in to see what he could do. And when I told him that, you know, I was going to put him over and make him the champ, he was like, I can't be a champ. That's probably not my DNA. I don't talk and this and that. I go, you don't worry about it. I go, you're going to go over in this market and this promotion like nobody else. And, you know, I'm probably, you know, you probably wouldn't want me to tell you this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just to tell you what kind of guy he was. Sabu got to the point where he would refuse pay for me. He would fly himself in because he wanted to be part of this promotion. And, you know, he suggested Rob to come in, Judge Dredd, other people that he was training himself. And, you know, he was such a great spokesperson. Cactus, Terry Funk, all those guys were spokesperson. Honky Tonk Man saying, brother, you gotta come into this. You got to be part of this. And, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier. Treat you right. But like, I mean, I remember trying to pay Sabu and he would tear up the check or not take the money because he says, hey, what you've done for me, I just appreciate that, brother. It's like, hey, can you come in, this and that? And he goes, I got frequent flyer miles. Don't worry. I'll fly me and Rob in. We'll come in on our own dime. It's like, no,
wow.
No, I'm going to pay you. I mean, you know, this is how we do it. But I think he was so appreciative of so many guys that stiffed him and a lot of other guys in the business that he's saying that this is run like a real promotion. So I think those are the things that I take out of this, like, you know, and I still have friendships with him and Rob and so many of the other guys, you know, to this day that, you know, those memories will last forever. People will remember the matches. They'll remember the crowds. They'll remember the innovative stuff we did. I remember the relationships, and to still have those relationships and not have one guy say a bad thing about what we did. For me, that's most important.
So based on what Johnny Paine said, did you know about the low-key wrestling training operation Virgil was running in the casino?
So I think, you know, I got a chance to see the podcast with Johnny, and I think just to clear some stuff up, I think Johnny was a little bit confused because that wasn't happening with me. So Buffalo Jim, who he was referring to, Buffalo Jim was not part of the NWC. Buffalo Jim, I went to him as a sponsor. So he was just one of our sponsors. We'd run his commercials, and Buffalo Jim wanted to be part of us, and he wanted to be a manager and that sort of thing. So he wasn't part of the NWC. But Buffalo, after I moved out of Vegas and the NWC was done, Buffalo picked up kind of where I left off, and he started his own promotion. So I think a couple of those things, Johnny got kind of the timeline mixed up where he was doing a Virgil, because he would reach out to some of those guys, but that wasn't the NWC. So Buffalo did his own promotion years after that. I think that was like 2 or 3 years after I moved out of Vegas, because I left Vegas in 98. We were doing the promotion in Sacramento.
Okay. And what was your reaction to Virgil coming up with the idea for Jim Neidhart to wear a KKK hood out to the ring?
Actually, that wasn't Virgil's idea. That was my idea, and it was kind of a group thing. So actually, the guy who really came up with the idea was the Thug. So because the Thug was Anvil's partner, so Thug actually wore the KKK mask, whatever you want to call it, first. So he wore that in a singles match to really irate people. Now you got to remember the context and the time. This is right after the Rodney King, beatings, 4 hours away from us in LA. And we had I'm not going to say predominantly, black crowd, but we were in North Las Vegas. And so we had, that type of element. And so we had to be very careful. We had security, we had police. And again, it was done in yet a tasteful way, but it was just a work, and it was a way to just, create some more, some more heat. And that's what it was all about. Anyway, but that was the Thug's idea. And then we brought Neidhart. He was so into it, and that came later. So then we did the Thug against Virgil in a singles match. And then we told Virgil what we were doing, and he was all on board with that. And again, so Junkyard Dog and Virgil were two of our mainstays, and they were big time crowd favorites. So then it went to the tag match where we brought Neidhart in, and then Neidhart and Thug both wore them in the tag team match. So again, just a little clarification where it started.
Do you think someone with the fame that Neidhart had at the time, if we were in the internet age, do you think he might have been more reticent about wearing that KKK hood to the ring?
Yeah, I think so. That was, overstepping some boundaries. And again, the stuff that not only we did, but just society did.
This is a totally different time in wrestling. This is
not just wrestling, just society in general. That if you had social media and this and that, you had to be very careful. But at that point in time, we were aware. Again, owner of the casino was like, "Are you out of your mind? What are you doing here?" So again, we were able to push those boundaries without going overboard, and we were able to find the happy medium. And people that were in the audience and watched the TV shows or the best of to this day, they still can remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, and let's put it into context. The WWE had terrorism gimmicks after 9/11. So let's, at least for you guys, the KKK dudes were the bad guys. So
exactly. And again, we picked this up too, where, with the Iranian crisis, when, Sheik was the champ and Hulk Hogan defeated him, in 83, whatever that was. That's kind of where that goes. And you bring in Nikolai Volkov and, the whole Russian thing, we're boycotting the Olympics and all that stuff. So that's where we learned to use that heat. And I give Vince McMahon all the credit in the world. And I will say, going back to the Warrior story, I guess, one of my shining moments, so to speak, was, when I did bring in Warrior, that I got a lawsuit delivered to me from Vince McMahon as he was suing me for using the name Ultimate Warrior and using Warrior because he thought he was still under contract. And then so I went to Warrior with this. He goes, "No, brother, this and that." And he actually illegally changed his name to Warrior. It was actually on his driver's license. And responded back to Vince and said, "Hey, your lawsuit has no merit whatsoever. We're billing him as Warrior." And never heard from him again. But I thought that was pretty funny that Vince McMahon was worried about a promoter down in Las Vegas, Nevada, who, as he viewed, stole, one of his main guys, who's just coming off one of the most, successful, wrestling pay-per-views in WrestleMania. But, his time was done with Vince McMahon. We checked all that out. And we used Ultimate Warrior as long as we could. But then, Warrior said he was using the name Warrior. And it's like, okay, you're still using the same getup. You're still dressing the same. And what's the difference? If we use Ultimate Warrior versus Warrior, people know who he is. So that was the end of that. There
you go. All right. So, as a promoter, I'm sure you're going to appreciate this. It's time for the Take It Home segment where, the promoter's out. He's screaming at the boys. Time to take this home. We're going to finish this up with some quick succession spots. So I got some quick fire questions for you to go on here and end the podcast.
1, 2, foot in the rope.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Craziest fan interaction at a show.
Craziest fan interaction was probably the situation I told you where the Iranian clubs and the guy came in and tackled the Sheik. I don't know how you can get any crazier than that. Or I will say, in the matches with Terry Funk and Virgil, that was crazy where, they're taking out in the crowd, garbage cans over the head, that sort of thing. I had one lady who took her purse and started beating up the thug. She was sitting in the front row every week. She was about 75 years old, and she was hitting the thug over her head with a purse, only to find out it was my timekeeper's mother.
I love it.
Those are a couple.
Oh, man. Let's see. The hardest you've laughed at a show?
Probably after Terry Funk came after me with a branding iron. Because we had kind of a spin-off on Piper's Pit. It was the doctor's office, which my radio character was always the doctor, and so we do kind of a Piper's Pit thing, and Funk was trying to chase me with a branding iron and almost lit me on fire. And then after the back of the locker room, I was like laughing my head off. I mean, there's probably so many things that immediately that comes to my mind.
Very nice. You talk about getting all these guys coming in. What's the worst gimmick you've seen?
Worst gimmick that was involved with me, or that just I've seen in general?
Or just, you've been at another show and you've seen it and you've gone, oh, geez, what is this?
I thought the Uncle Elmer thing was ridiculous. I mean, something like that. I was never a big into the Hillbilly Jim, Uncle Elmer, that type of phase. There's probably several other things, but
you booked Little Haystack.
I had Little Haystack, okay, but that was his gimmick, and we knew where it was going to go. But the deal with Haystack is he can work. I mean, Wayne could work. I mean, he could go off the top rope and he could do the moonsaults, and so that was cool. So I don't know. Just in our promotion, I was very careful about. I didn't want to get too gimmicky. I didn't want too cornballish. That's why I made sure, I had hit music, coming out. Everyone had good ring entrance music, and again, I was probably maybe a little over the top with that, being so hands-on. But then again, I just wanted to make sure it came across good for the fans. But, outside, I don't know, there's probably a lot of other real bad gimmicks that, don't come to my head at the top. If you said something, I go, oh, yeah, no problem.
So this is kind of a touchy-feely question, but I always talked about the pure joy in wrestling, the moment that gives you goosebumps, the thing that happens and you're like, this is why I love this sport, performance, whatever you're going to call it. What is that moment when it comes to either before a match, after a match, during a match? What's the time when you're like, this is the moment I love?
Yeah, seeing it hit a crescendo on how you plan it, and then you see how it's executed. And when you see that, and you see the crowd on their feet, just raucous as can be, music's blaring. And I always say, with boxing, there's nothing like the initial ring entrance. Boxing and wrestling for me, I go back to those Madison Square Garden days when Hulk Hogan would come down that short aisle at MSG, or Randy Macho Man Savage, or Roddy Piper. And for us, when we would have those type of ring entrances, or then just to have that match go off as you planned it, to me, that's it. And I think when the show is over and that night we would go back, into the dressing room and just say, yes, we scored tonight, fellas. Every match was spot on. The end of the night was always so key on how you wanted to send the fans home. And I always wanted to send the fans home happy. And I think for me, that was like, yes, we did it again tonight.
Any of the workers ever surprise you as far as maybe their work rate or how well they were to deal with? Because you always hear about, telephone and wrestling, this person's bad, this person's horrible, this person's, blah, 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 this person doesn't work well. But were you ever pleasantly surprised by someone you thought, I've heard so many bad things, but this person was awesome?
Yeah. I think there's probably a few guys, like that. You never know when you get a big star like that. I mean, how they're going to come in, if they're going to think they're bigger than the promotion or they're not really that good of a worker. But then you're pleasantly surprised. I think from the veterans, no one really surprised me because I kind of knew what I was getting. Even if it was the first time, they came in and worked. I will say there were a couple guys that I was disappointed in. And again, they didn't come back to work. But for the local guys and the younger guys, I think that's where I got, wow, that guy's impressed me. And I named a couple already, like with Tom Howard, who was Zuma. You mentioned Little Haystacks. Those two guys, I was very surprised. And again, when you do that and you show that kind of effort, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give you a chance, to work some more and even elevate you. Johnny Paine was one of those guys. Didn't exactly know what I was getting from Johnny Paine because, self-admittedly, he was a stiff worker, but Johnny was like a sponge. He came in and he wanted to be one of the boys. He's willing to do whatever I asked him to do. And I never forget, when we did one of the first, again, no one knew who Johnny Paine was. He was Johnny Pitbull. And he probably told you the story. It's like, well, we're not going to have you be the Pitbull. I got the Junkyard Dog. I said, we can go, let's go in a different direction here. And so that's why we created the Psycho gimmick. And I said, I want you just to go way over the top here. And he took it to another level, which I didn't even ask him. So I remember the very first, interview we had him do. He goes, let me know when you're about 2 minutes, before we're going to record this. I said, okay. He goes in and pops the Alka-Seltzer in his mouth, and he starts foaming at the mouth. And that was all him. I'm going, beautiful. I said, bring that, Johnny. And then he would bring that, into the ring for a ring entrance too. So he took it to the next level, which I was pleasantly surprised. And I knew he had a wrestling background and he was being trained, in the Bay Area there. I thought that was great. But, he was great. He was one of those guys that I said, you know what, you're going places with us because he followed the script. He followed the program. He worked hard on his own. He did whatever I asked him to do, and he was a great team player.
Any good ribs the boys ever played on you?
I don't know if you call it a rib or not, but the night that George the Animal Steel and Jake the Snake made me go have sushi with them. I was not a sushi guy, so we went to this restaurant, and they said, "No, brother, you're not leaving here until you down like 6 of these sushis or whatever." But I never really got ribbed much. I think just because I think there was that initial respect, possibly. Or whatever, but I wasn't really viewed as an outsider or whatever. So again, they were, I was the guy writing the checks and putting them up. So it really was more of a partnership, and I think that's the beautiful part of it. But never got that like they did with some other promoters that you hear about, But nothing really to. I wish I had something juicy for you, but off the top of my head, it doesn't come to mind.
Oh, no worries, brother. It's about that time. Go ahead and promote your radio show, please, and your social media. Let's get for people to check you out. You're doing sports right now.
Yeah. I do my sports talk radio show. It's the TC Martin Show. Airs in Vegas every day, Monday through Friday, 2 to 3 p.m. Real simple. Go to the website, tcmartinshow.com. You can listen live. You can go to the podcast section, listen to any of the past shows. The interviews are up there. Again, we still hit wrestling. Rob Van Dam is a regular on the show. Again, we have these occasional NWC reunion shows, which we do as well too. We've had Terry Funk, Cactus on. Like I said, Rob comes on. Sabu. So yeah, you can, if you're a wrestling lover, we still hit that element because there are people here in Las Vegas that still remember those days. Follow me on Twitter at TCMartin21. Hit any questions whatsoever. And yes, there's pirated stuff that's out there from the NWC, and people have been trying to pitch that to people. And again, that's doesn't have any effect on me. But we will be coming out with an official line that people want to see that, because I realize now that there is a reinvigoration, so to speak, that people want to see these matches and stuff like that. And so we're in the process of putting together those masters and making those available, so you will have them, on DVD, Blu-ray, or however, you can view them instead of a lot of the copies, the pirated stuff that's out there right now that people are viewing. Again, what you're witnessing out there right now is not stuff that I'm putting out or we're putting out there. So we'll make that available and bring it back. And I think for people that are not familiar with it, maybe like yourself, that you could see it in the context, the way it was happening, and view the full and true story yourself on video.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, sir. And just one quick thing to end it out on. Have you been watching the latest WWE product? Do you watch AEW? Is there anything in wrestling that you're still into?
Not at all. And I get this question asked all the time. After I quit promoting, I basically stepped away from wrestling, and I still respect it. I love the art of it. But for me, it went in a direction, I would say probably in, the early 2000s, with a direction that was too gimmicky, too crazy, too pyrotechnic. And I kind of felt like a lot of the way that a lot of the old wrestlers felt too. It's like, this isn't, the way it was. Not that I'm the old man, get off my lawn type of thing, but I always promoted wrestling and viewed wrestling as I want it to be on par with the other sports, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, baseball, and, have a sense for portraying it, but with, some of the gimmicks and the way everything is, it just, for me, I kind of lost interest in it. I didn't think the talent was the same as well. And again, I know that, I think it's great that there are more and more independents that are making a comeback, and I support everyone who has that same vision that I did back in the day. But it's very hard to compete, unless you have a plethora of money. It's hard to compete against the WWEs and the Vince McMahon of the day. And I think, again, I was never trying to compete. We were just trying to carve our niche in our territory, in our area. And I know that it was respected, by guys who worked for those companies, because personal friends of mine worked for WCW, for Ted Turner, who worked for Vince McMahon and the WWF at the time. And we know there was that respect. So, for me, I don't watch it now. I haven't watched it in probably a good 15 years. And, occasionally, I may pop it on, but it's system. It's not in my blood. And it probably goes to the sense where, again, I'm so involved in all the other sports, with my career that, I don't feel that need for it. But, if it was treated back the way it was, back in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, I'd probably be into it. But, but not saying I don't miss it, because I miss the guys, I miss the stories, I miss the fun that we had. And, it's great that we can still reconnect and relive these moments.
Oh, hey, even Tony Schiavone didn't watch wrestling for about 10 years after WCW closed. So,
there you go.
So sometimes when you're in it and then something that you love is taken off, you're like, I'm not about this anymore.
Just to add to that point, Paul, obviously I have a lot of friends who are former, NBA, NFL players, Major League Baseball, and this and that. And it's really the same with those guys as well. One of my good friends played for the Chicago Bulls, and I had him on my show every week, talking about The Last Dance. And he just despised talking about it. He goes, I'll come on for you. And I said, people are going to expect you to talk about it because you're in these episodes, the 10 episodes that ESPN aired with The Last Dance. You're part of those championship teams. And it's like, I can't stand talking about it because I lived it. And a lot of guys don't watch NBA basketball if they're former players. They don't watch the NFL anymore because once you live it, that was your business, and you don't necessarily like the way that business has gone and turned. So, for fans, they don't understand that. But if you're a former athlete or coach, and that was part of your life for so many years, there's some good times, but then again, there are some ugly times as well too that you just, you want to step away from.
Absolutely. Well, sir, you have yourself a good day. I hope you're, good. Luckily, you're in a business that's you can still do during all this shelter in place, all this stuff that's going on. I do recommend NWA Power if you do want to dabble back into wrestling. That's on YouTube. Old school feel, closed circuit, small crowd, good. Old school gimmicks. They come out, interview, wrestle. Come out, interview, wrestle. Okay. Very old school and good. If you want to dip a toe back in the water, that's the one I would go ahead and do. You have yourself a good day, sir.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.